Sorry, forgive the interruption. If I want to get a phone call, I can start making a video, it seems. I can wait for 2 hours and not get a single call, but start filming, and there they are. I'm not going to refilm. I'm just going to pick up where I left off because this was about my third attempt of getting interrupted. Anyway, I want you to take into consideration different approaches, different sides on what Bloom says about this awakening culture, this kind of revivalist culture. Realize that a lot of the things that, if you're familiar at all, you may be too young or haven't had experience with, but if you're at all familiar with like the kind of Billy Graham crusades, the kind of salvation preaching, altar call type thing, that really comes out of the Finney movement, the Finney awakening movement that Bloom talks about a little bit. That there's a video about that. There's an article and a sermon from Finney. This is important too, really, from the 1800s on. What really shapes kind of American evangelicalism, especially, but a lot of the American expression of religion, what it means to be Christian. This revivalist movement is very important to shaping the country's expression of Christianity. So I think Bloom is correct on that. You'll see that in these videos. In fact, the video on Finney, I think it's Finney. It may be the video on Cane Ridge, but it talks about really this was the foundation of American religion, and I think Bloom kind of has that sense. It doesn't say the foundation of American religion, but the video talks about the kind of this is Finney especially as kind of this foundational man in how sort of evangelism, sharing the gospel, is done in a church context. These kind of big revival services where people are called down to the front to make an immediate personal decision. That language really comes out of this Finney movement. One final quick thing, in looking at his sermon on slavery, you'll notice, or you should notice, that he assumes going in that the average Christian is going to think that any drinking of hard liquor is just wrong in and of itself, not just drunkenness, which was previously held. The Bible says, "Do not be drunk with wine." It doesn't say don't drink wine. Most Christians, through most of history, have drunk some amount of wine or even beer in cultures that had beer. It was drunkenness that was always looked down upon. But in the 1800s, you have the beginning. We won't really get into this a lot. We'll mention it in passing from time to time. I've done some work on it within archives. On the temperance movement in the U.S. I mean, the reason you get laws in the 1900s, early 1900s, against alcohol, it's not some small radical group forcing something on a bunch of people. There was a large movement in the U.S., much like the anti-drug movement in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, because there was so much alcoholism, broken families, abused children, alcoholism among kind of abandoned children, in part related to the Industrial Revolution, in part related to kind of the disjointedness of society rooted in kind of expansion. You had the Civil War, which probably contributed. So you have this kind of growth of alcoholism coming out of a lot of different events in American history. And so there is an aversion to drink alcohol as such. Will play into the Mormon movement, plays very much into the revivalist movement. So Finney takes for granted that anybody reading his sermon about how to live as a Christian is going to assume that to drink something like rum or whiskey is just wrong. It's just sin. That's the assumption. It's not been the assumption in the church prior to that in most of the world. It may not be the assumption in most of the world even today for Christians. But for the revivalist movement of the early 1800s up through the 1960s, 70s, 80s, drinking alcohol was in itself a sin. So when he wants to talk about how bad a sin something is, that's kind of he's holding this up as, you all know this is bad. Let me tell you that this is equally bad. This slavery over here is just as bad. We can't be part of that any more than we would want to be part of drinking. So recognize that may be a little foreign to you, but understand that that's pretty common in this culture because of the level, the just expansiveness of problems rooted, connected with alcoholism during about 100 years here from the 1800s into the early 1900s. That movement in the early 1900s to abolish alcohol was not just a random small group of people who did that. That was actually a popular movement with a large support from a large segment of the U.S. population. And you see that in Finney's sermon. So just some things to think about as you look at this this unit, this module. We'll continue our discussion on Gnosticism and Orphism in relation to this revivalism. We'll ask questions about the fruit of the revivalism, looking at Frederick Douglass. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.